You got an A-level cast, you got an A-level budget, and an effects department ran by a bunch of preschoolers. What could happen? Okay, everybody, long before there was ever Armageddon and way before there was ever A Deep Impact, which borrowed heavily from this movie, by the way, there was a little flick in 1979 called Meteor. Well, before we dig into this gem anymore, before we look into it any farther, once and again, and as always, to the trailer.
Space. Timeless. Infinite. Eternal. For countless millennia, the stars and planets traveled their silent paths in perfect harmony. It was called Orpheus, the meteor. Its power is greater than all the hydrogen bombs. Its speed is greater than any rocket ever conceived. Its force can shatter continents. Its mass can level mountain ranges. It cannot think. It cannot reason. It cannot change its course. And it's going to strike the Earth in 6 days.
That meteor is 5 miles wide and it's definitely gonna hit us. It's coming apart in a million pieces.
Your government, in collaboration with the best scientific brains at its disposal, developed the project to deal with this emergency.
Attitude correction complete. Situation nominal.
Ориентация закончена. Положение нормально.
Anything go wrong?
Once the rockets have been launched, they switch over to their own internal decision-making systems. And if these systems perform perfectly, well then, there's no problem. But if there's a malfunction...
What are the odds?
Your guess is as good as mine.
We can expect the first splinters in 24 hours. We've picked up another splinter. A big one.
Direction?
The United States. The eastern seaboard.
It's 5 miles wide. It's traveling at a speed of 30,000 miles per hour. And there is no place on Earth to hide.
Alright, this motion picture was directed by Ronald Neame. I can never pronounce it right, and I probably still can't do it now. Anyway, he directed one of my favorite movies of all time, a movie I worship, I love. We're talking about The Poseidon Adventure. But he did other things too. You know, he did Great Expectations, A Brief Encounter, The Odessa File, come on, you gotta remember that. Scrooge, Hopscotch, First Monday in October, The Man Who Never Was, Gambit, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Foreign Body. So he had actually a pretty decent, solid career and a halfway, better than halfway resume. I mean, come on, for Poseidon Adventure alone, shit, that's a career right there. Okay, playing Dr. Paul Bradley. Sean Connery. Let's knock off the shit. Let's do this. Of course, he was in little things like Rising Sun, which I already reviewed, and The Rock, and Medicine Man, and Entrapment, and The Hunt for Red October, which I love, and The Untouchables, and Highlander, which I love, and I think I reviewed, and Outland, and Robin and Miriam, and Murder on the Orient Express, and Zardos, and of course, he was James Bond. Thunderball, Doctor No, Diamonds Are Forever, Never Say Never Again. There's probably one I'm leaving now. I can't remember. It doesn't make a difference. It is what it is. Sean Connery, he's a legend. You get it. Whatever. Playing Tatiana Donskaya, I think that's how you pronounce it. Doesn't make a difference. Natalie Wood. Oh, let's go down memory lane, shall we? We're talking about she was in West Side Story. She was in Rebel Without a Cause, and Splendor in the Grass, and Brainstorm, and The Last Married Couple in America, and Gypsy, and The Great Race, Sex and the Single Girl, Love with the Proper Stranger. So, it's Natalie Wood. Gone way too soon. Is what it was. She was in this. Let's keep moving. Playing Dr. Harry Sherwood. Somebody I've never really had a chance to talk about before, and I'm really glad I'm getting to do it now. We're talking about Karl Malden. Let's do this. We're talking about he was in stuff like A Streetcar Named Desire. He was on the Waterfront, and Patton, and One-Eyed Jacks, and The Birdman of Alcatraz, and Gypsy, and How the West Was Won, The Cincinnati Kid, The Gunfighter, and of course, to anybody of my age, we're talking about Those Streets of San Francisco. Show you with Michael Douglas. Look it up. Playing Dr. Alexei Dubov, Brian Keith. Oh, I think I had to talk about him when I reviewed Hooper. Doesn't matter. Let's go. We're talking about he's been in little motion pictures like, of course, The Wind and the Lion, The Rare Breed, but a huge TV career. And we're talking about Hardcastle and McCormick, Heartland, Pursuit of Happiness, Centennial, The Little People, and of course, again, if you're my age, you remember back in the 70s, you watched it all the time, whether it was in reruns or whatever. Family Affair. Remember Buffy, Jody, all that kind of shit? It was like such a wholesome little show. The butler. He's part of the American lexicon, folks. And playing General Adlon, Martin Landau, who you know, I think, or almost positive, already muted when I did Without Warning. But he did other stuff. Let's roll. We're talking about he's been in motion adventures like North by Northwest, and Ed Wood, and Tucker the Man in His Dream, and The Majestic, and Ready to Rumble, and Treasure Island. But he was also huge on TV, man. Come on, there's two things you're going to always remember him for. A, Mission Impossible, and B, Space 1999, that plagued little show that had a couple-year run. Could have been great, and they kind of fumbled it. And there's other motion picture and TV stars in this thing whose faces you are going to remember and who you're going to say, oh, really? First off, let's talk about it. Henry Fonda. Yep, Henry Fonda's in this, but yes, he is kind of a B player because he ain't even that much, but we're talking on Golden Pond and 12 Angry Men and How the West Was Won, is what it was. Richard Dysart, The Thing, Pale Rider, shit. Joseph Campanella, oh my God, he was on TV so much back in the day I can't even talk about it, but we're talking everything from One Day at a Time to Days of Our Lives. Sybil Danning, Battle Beyond the Stars, Howling 2, any other movie where a girl had to go topless, she was in it. Trevor Howard, Gandhi, The Seawolves, and Bibi Besch. We're talking Star Trek II, The Wrath of Freaking Khan, Hardcore, and basically almost every other TV show known to mankind. So there's a lot of faces in this, more than I even mentioned. Keep an eye out, look around, you'll see them, they're there. Just keep paying attention. All right, everybody, I'm going to do this in 90 seconds or less. So I can keep it short, keep it fast, keep it entertaining, keep it moving so we can get to where we'd much rather be. The summation, let's face it, the trailer was so long, it probably filled you in on a lot of this, so it's almost moot by this point, but we're going to do it anyway. The motion picture starts off, there's a boat race going on, you know, pleasure yachting, that kind of shit, and one of the guys in charge of one of the boats is Mr. Sean Connery himself. And a big Coast Guard boat pulls up next to him and says, get the hell off of there, stop your racing, we need you back in Washington. See, Sean Connery doesn't work for NASA anymore, he doesn't have anything to do with that, he's been out of the scene for 5 years, but he's kind of been ordered back. Well, he goes back into town, meets up with his old friend, Karl Malden, and a bunch of military people, and they start filling in on what has been going on. See, there was a meteor coming in, and it hit into the big asteroid belt. Well, at the same time, we sent this space probe with some guys on it, literally Challenger 2, I think they called it, and it was supposed to be going to Mars, but we sent it over to the asteroid belt just to watch, to see if anything happened. Of course, there was a giant collision that hit one of the major asteroids. This meteor smacked it, broke into a whole bunch of other little pieces, and those pieces flew off, killing everybody on the Challenger 2, by the way. Just saying. And now there's a giant piece of asteroid. Another meteor headed at the Earth. 5 miles wide. It's going to wipe everything out, kill everything that ever walked, talked, moved, breathed. You get the idea. Well, the reason you find out that Mr. Sean Connery was mad at NASA was that he helped design something that could stop these kind of events. This thing called Hercules. And it was basically a satellite with a bunch of nuclear warheads on it, pointed out into space. Well, you know how governments work. So they took the missiles, instead of pointing them at space, pointed them at Earth, at all the enemies. There you go. So he's not really happy with the establishment. He's not really happy with the government. Well, they do some analysis. They run some research. They find out, even with all those warheads, we can't stop this thing. We need the Russians to help us, because they have a mystery satellite too that just happens to have warheads pointed at Earth. They don't think the Russians will cop to this. They're like, they're never going to admit it. So the President of the United States gets up there and says, hey, we have this thing. Whoopsies, and we know the Russians have it too. Whoopsies, we hope they admit it, and we can all save Earth and move happily ever after. The world pressure is enormous. Russia sends over a guy, Brian Keith, and he's got a really, really, really hot translator, Natalie. And they all start working together to figure out a way to stop the incoming meteor. In the middle of that, you got Martin Landau, who just has no brain whatsoever and just keeps saying, it'll never work, blah, blah, blah. Some splinters from the asteroid, meteor, whatever the frig it is, come down, hit Earth, destroy some cities, do some shit. It is what it is. You get the idea. Will they stop the big piece in the end? Will they be able to stop the major piece from flattening all of Earth? Told you Deep Impact ripped this off. Will they be able to pull off the unstoppable object with the combined powers of the United States and the USSR? Well, I'm sure you already guessed it, but I'm not going to give it away. It is what it is. Let's get to the summation. Okay, everybody, does Meteor work? I guess I recommend you take a look. But there's a lot of flaws. Let's just get going to the big three, and then we'll get to the rest of it. The directing, if you remove anything with special effects, and believe me, we're going to get there in a little bit, the directing is actually cool. It's actually shot well. Looks nice. All the scenes with actors and dialogue are well presented and well done. I mean, the guy directed goddamn Side Adventure. So, you know he knows how to frame a shot. It looks good, minus the special effects. Keep that in your head. The writing's okay. It's not astounding. I mean, as far as story writing, there's more plot holes than you could goddamn drive the Titanic through. But as far as dialogue, it's all right. Not bad, not great. It's all right. In the acting, you got some top-level actors in here. By the way, I think Sean Connery and Karl Malden are just phenomenal in this thing. I mean, they are great. Natalie Wood is really, really good in it too. So they really, really make it. I love Brian Keith, but the way that they had him play the character, which I think he kind of took that character over very late in the production of this, they were just like, you know, we need that guy to switch to this character, whatever. It's a long story. But Brian Keith wound up playing the Russian scientist, doctor, diplomat, call him what you will, and he kind of played him in a strange, jolly, jovial way. I'm not saying it didn't work. I'm just saying it was kind of an odd way, an odd choice of playing that character. So, Brian Keith, love the guy. This performance is a little weird. And Martin Landau, who's an actor, although I just think the guy is great. All-time fun guy to watch. But in this, he's just basically shouting and screaming all the time and yelling. Is he effective at it? Yes, but the character is just so goddamn over the top. We were just like, somebody restrain this guy. He's a fucking lunatic. So, the acting is really good in this, with a couple of little overdone performances. Okay, now let's get back on track to why this movie kind of works and why this movie kind of doesn't. I'll give you the good before I give you the bad. First off, any kind of motion picture, and especially disaster motion picture where everything's on the line, the first thing they got to do is give you characters that you kind of care about and you kind of want to follow and you kind of want to see what happens to, along with the rest of mankind. And they somewhat effectively do that. You like the angry, cantankerous character that's being given to you by Sean Connery. You kind of like the jolly Russian doctor that's given to you by Brian Keith. Of course, how can you not dig Natalie Wood? So there is some of that. You kind of get into their characters and you're like, okay, let me see where he goes, let me see where she goes, let me see where they go. And it was kind of cool. So on that front, it wasn't too bad. The movie moves along at a fairly good pace. It's not really slow and dragging. It's not overtly sped up so that it kind of wrecks the whole vibe of just being some crash bang whip bop type of movie. It's moving at a good pace, but not too slow, not too fast. It has that. in its positive side. And let's be honest, it just falls in with all the other disaster movies of the 1970s. Disaster movies come and go. And the 1970s was loaded with them. Everything from the Towering Inferno to Earthquake to every airport movie you could ever imagine. It was loaded with the world is going to come to an end things. Either bugs are going to take it over, spiders are going to... Something's going to happen to the planet, and it's all going to go to shit. Be ready. And those movies were all over the place in the 1970s. And they kind of died out in the 80s, and then they came back in full force in the 90s. And they just are cyclical. You know what I mean? They come and they go, and you get them, then you don't, and then you get them. And this was made during an era of when you got them. And it was typical for the time. Was it the best example of them? No. But it was an example of them nonetheless. So if you're into that kind of thing, and you want to see that kind of a flick, here you go. There you are. And we can't help but notice that this motion picture had some copycats, most notably Deep Impact. I mean, Jesus, they most took like 85% of the story from this and just dumped it into that. So there's things in this that are going to look a little bit like, well, I've seen this before, if you haven't seen this before. But remember, it was ahead of the curve instead of the ones that came later. So it was, you know, I wouldn't say trend-setting, but it was there just a few minutes ahead of the rest of the pack. Now, let's get down to brass taxes of what's wrong with this motion picture. And there are, well, 2 or 3 things. A, loopholes, and B, horrendously bad special effects. Let's get to the loopholes. And some of these things I just think are story and characteristic mistakes. One, I really truly believe that they didn't need to put those astronauts on that space probe in the beginning of the motion picture, because it was like everybody in America knows, or the world knows, that, you know, you can't just do that. You can't just say there's a bunch of guys in like a space station going around and just be like, well, you know, now you're going to go fly off here, and now you're going to go fly off there, and this thing is just like taking a 747 on a vacation. We're going to take you off a Mars trip and stick you to an asteroid belt thing. No biggie. Everybody knows you don't do things like that, and you can't do things like that. So it was just riddled with little things like that that gave you plot holes and loopholes and a feeling that you're like, okay, this is the world I'm living in, but here's some cheesy ways of getting around problems with the story, and it had that against it. And number 2, the special effects of this motion picture are just horrendous. They're some of the worst I've ever seen in a major motion picture, especially when you use it in comparative nature to the rest of the movies of its time. This is 1979. Think about it. You've got Star Wars already hit, Empire Strikes is about to come out, you got the Battlestar Galactica TV show floating around, you've already had Aliens, you got Star Trek the Motion Picture, for Christ's sake. You have all this kind of stuff with amazing special effects in it, and then this thing gets delivered. This thing that absolutely looks like shit. I'm not kidding. I'm not joking around. It's the honest to God truth. This is one of the worst looking motion pictures as far as special effects goes I have ever seen in the history of my life. They said that there was a company that got fired, then another company got fired, and at the last minute they threw this thing together with a third company who was making special effects for basically nothing, and my God, it shows. You can tell these are just like model spaceship kits they fucking grabbed from, like, you know, some toy store or some kind of stuff. I think one of them was actually Skylab that they were using in the beginning. You can tell when they did things like moved it, but it was supposed to be past the sun, and it was just a stage light as the sun in the background, but you could see it's a stage light. It was amazingly bad. And that really, more than anything, more than the goofy plot holes, more than the goddamn convoluted story, the special effects in this thing will pull you out of it faster than anything you have ever seen. Now, especially in today's modern age where you're going to see those special effects blowing up on a 60, 65-inch whatever TV. If you're watching this on your phone, it's going to look like shit. But you'll roll. If you're watching on something big where you can actually look at it, oh my God, does this thing actually fall apart? And it's practically horrendous how bad it looks. So we destroyed this motion, which, I mean, it was competing with the black hole, for Christ's sake. So when you're talking about a motion picture that had worse special effects than some TV movies, and then actually, to make it work, they were cobjobbing pieces out of other movies and throwing it into this thing, it makes a major motion picture look low budget, television quality, and basically like shit. So as you're in it, you're going to get pulled out, and then you're going to get into it, and you're going to get pulled out, and you're going to get into it, and you're going to get pulled out. And if the effects don't do it enough, there's just goofy shit in the story sometimes where you're like, what are they thinking? What are they doing? You know what I mean? Sean Connery, as the world's about to end, he's just more interested in hitting on Natalie Wood, this really hot interpreter from Russia. And by the way, her parents really were Russian. So speaking of all that and everything like that, that was pretty fucking smooth sailing for her. Anyway, that kind of thing. And then the fact that everybody knows these meteors are coming to Earth, like to start decimating shit, and they're having like a giant ski outing. You're just like, what? If you knew there was like 2 days left of existence, you're not going to go on a big ski trip with 2,000 people. It's just, shit like that. Shit like that. So in the end, why am I recommending this motion picture? Well, basically because it was a period of time, and part of a period of time, where you were getting a bunch of motion pictures of this nature. And it's cool to look at it in the context of that. It's cool to say to it, well, how does this match up against Towering Inferno, or Airport 77, or The Poseidon Adventure, and all those other motion pictures. And again, when it's just Sean Connery, or it's just Brian Keith, or it's just Karl Malden, who's phenomenal in this, you watch it and you say, this is all right, this is cool. But much like a movie like The Final Countdown, or some of those things, don't look for logic. Don't look for good special effects, because you ain't going to find them here. But it was part of that era. It was part of that time. It deserves a look at for some of the acting done in it. The directing is cool when there's no spaceships in it. And it's just, it is what it is. Go in, check it out. It's out there for free. Watch it. Don't expect much, but don't think it's going to be the worst time you ever spent in your life. All right, everybody. Have a great one. Oh, and by the way, the score, and the tunnel sequence at the end with all the water and shit coming in was actually really kick-ass. So that special effects department, those special effects were actually pretty good. I got to point that out before I go. Anyway, enough of that. I got shit to do. Anyway, be good. Take care. Stay out of trouble. Be kind to a stranger. Be there for a friend. But most of all, never, I mean ever, take any bullshit from anybody. See you soon.